Welcome to More Than a Broker, the podcast that goes beyond the traditional definition of a logistics provider. My name is Andrew Elsener, co-founder of Spot. In each episode, we will dive into the stories of industry experts, keep you up to date on the highs and lows of the logistics marketplace, and introduce you to the people behind the advanced technologies that are driving innovation for brokers, shippers, and carriers within our industry. Join us as we explore the world of logistics through a different lens. This is More Than a Broker.
Drivers, start your engine!
How does somebody become a professor that studies supply chain? Because is your dad in supply chain too?
Yes, my dad is supply chain professor as well. So probably the first generation of people whose parents could have been a supply chain professor on.
There's not a lot.
Yeah, it's not like, English or math. We haven't been teaching it for that long.
And you're both doctors, PhDs, right?
Yes. And so he was in it, my whole life, basically. And I actually avoided it for a long time. I was like, oh, okay, I'm not doing that. I'm going to go to law school and do something else. And eventually I graduated my undergrad and I was going to go to law school. And I took one law class, a pre-law class. And I thought, well, I'm not going to law school. That sounds like a terrible idea. And so luckily I had also done my test to get into the master's, the MBA program at Nevada, did that. And I took a supply chain class, not from him, from somebody else. And I was like, oh, shoot, I love this so much. And so I kept taking classes. And eventually I went to Arizona State to get my degree. I had worked after school at Amazon for a little bit. I was a ops manager, and that was a lot of fun. And I thought, I bet it'd be fun to teach this. And so I left and went to Arizona State. And my dad was actually at Rutgers at the time in New Jersey. And they kept coming out to visit us because we had the only grandkid. And eventually the faculty at ASU were like, would you just like to live here? Because you're here all the time. And so halfway through my program, it went from he was 3,000 miles away to he was down the hallway, which was great, actually. And he's still there now. And then I came out and went straight to Colorado State out of school. And I've been here for 9 years, and a great place. And, to me, it's funny because supply chains, as a discipline, I think the very first school to ever have it was like Michigan State in 1965. And now it's kind of all over the place. But even now, being around 60 years, it's still new. Like, it's really fun for me that I'll get students. I just taught the freshman class last week, and I'll get students coming in. They have no idea what supply chains are. But then you explain it to them. Like a question I always ask them is like, okay, give me one product that's just solely sourced, every piece, the movement of it, the labor, everything is just from the United States. And I'll have a big bag of candy. I'll give you 5 pieces of candy. And that doesn't exist, actually, is the answer. But
isn't it crazy though?
Oh yeah.
Especially in today's environment.
Right. But it's so fun to see them realize like, oh yeah. Like I had one guy like, my mom's got a bakery and she does all her flour. It's all from our neighborhood. And I said, oh, does she have sugar when she bakes? And he's like, oh yeah, I guess so. It's just, for me, it's so fun to get to sort of bring people into the world of supply chain. So I'm probably better off talking about it than doing it, I bet.
I was trying to imagine your Thanksgiving meals. Do you and your dad just blow everybody? Is it supply chain?
No, he's like, all right, guys, that's enough. We get it. We understand the amazing turnover they must have had at the produce warehouses to make these green beans. That's good.
Yeah, how the trucks get in, what's the dwell times, how the ports, all the fun stuff. So when you're picking a concentration, because supply chain has evolved so much. So when you get in to do your PhD, how did you pick where you want to even focus?
My advisor was a guy named Craig Carter, who had been at Nevada when I was younger, and then he had gone down to Arizona State. He was kind of the one who recruited me down with him. Before I went down there, I had a couple jobs between my undergrad and my PhD. One was a procurement job. I worked at a casino, obviously. I was a buyer for a casino, which if you're 22 and 23 is actually a phenomenal job.
It's got to be awesome.
It was so much fun. And so I kind of had seen that side of it, the procurement side. Then I went into e-commerce and was an ops manager, but it was an inbound position for the most part. So I was doing like receiving, returns, dealing with all of like the logistics and the docks and stuff. And so I'd kind of seen all of the hands-on parts of operations and procurement. And Craig, the guy at Arizona State, was my advisor. He was a heavy procurement guy. And specifically, he's very recognized in the world of procurement and sustainability, really. And so I did a lot of supply chain sustainability stuff. And that's kind of what I thought my career was going to be. And I still do work in sustainability. But then when my father joined the faculty, he was really a logistics guy and reverse logistics. I think he wrote the very first book about reverse logistics when I was 10 or something. I remember seeing, I was just skateboarding around the driveway. I wasn't positive what he was doing, but apparently it was writing a reverse logistics book. And he had always had this idea, like, we could do a version of the PMI, but with logistics. That might be cool. And I said, well, I'll help you with that. I mean, he'd always wanted to do it, but he didn't have enough labor. And he's like, I'll create labor. And so I was like, yeah, I'll do it with you. And I had done some transportation stuff and research anyway. And we started doing this index in 2016.
So that's the LMI, right?
The LMI, Logistics Managers Index. And we totally based it on the PMI. And the PMI ISM offices are in Tempe, Arizona. I mean, they're 5 miles away from campus. And so we just went down there and said, hey, guys, how does this work? Can you show us? And they're very friendly with us. And I actually think our two indexes are very complementary to each other. But ours is really the idea we had was the PMI made all the sense in the world in the 60s. And it was started by two professors at Michigan State, again, where sort of supply chain started as an academic discipline. One of them came out to Arizona State because he thought, man, it'd be nice if it was warm. So in the 60s, I think it made all sense in the world to let's predict future economic activity by looking at manufacturing, because we had a very manufacturing-based economy. And our idea was, well, in the 2010s, 2020s, we should actually predict economic activity by looking at transportation and looking at warehousing, because we have such a service-based economy now relative to what we had in the 60s. And so our idea was, well, if something's going to be sold, in a store or online, it was on a truck last month, or it was sitting in a warehouse, or it was an inventory. And so the idea was, let's take these logistics metrics and see if they can be predictive. And it's been amazing, actually, how well movements in transportation and inventories really do sort of foreshadow economic activity.
When you started in 2016, so outside of 2020 to 21, what's been the craziest thing that you've seen in the LMI? Can you foreshadow like the 17 to 18, 18, 19 phenomenon, and then 22 to 23? Does the LMI show that?
Oh, yeah. I think that the two most important things to look at are transportation prices, transportation capacity, and the interplay between them.
Does capacity, though, are you going out, you're sending a survey out and you have a set of questions to logistics, so warehousing and manufacturing?
So, yeah. So I should explain how the survey works. So every month we send a survey out. And in the beginning, we partnered with CSCMP, the Council for Supply Chain Managers and Supply Chain Management Professionals. And they actually let us use their distribution list to get ourselves started. We've really evolved past that now because we have kind of, been doing it 9 years. So we have a whole bunch of other people who've joined, but they helped us out and they allowed us, because we've been good friends with CSCMP, to go on stage at one of their conferences and say, hey, everybody, here's this new thing. Put the link up, a QR that you could scan on your phone. Hey, anybody want to take the survey? And so we ask people every month about movements in inventory levels, inventory costs, warehousing, capacity utilization and price, and transportation capacity utilization and price. And our respondent base is pretty diverse. I mean, it's retailers, a lot of wholesalers, LSPs, warehousing people, 3PLs, fleets, in a bunch of different industries like garden and electronics and grocery and auto. Yeah, a lot of auto. And the idea is we're taking a big snapshot. We're not that focused on this specific sector or this industry. We're really looking at the full sort of picture. We're sort of a macro level measurement. And the way to read our numbers is basically, so we ask people, all right, transportation prices from July to August, are they staying the same? Are they going down? Are they going up? And when we kind of average all those together, we get what's called a diffusion or a change index. And the way to read it is basically 50 means no change. It's exactly the same as it was last month. Below 50 means it's contracting. Above 50 means it's expanding. And further above 50, the faster rate of expansion, further below 50, faster rate of contraction. And we get a couple hundred people usually every month to answer the survey. And we're choosy about who answers the survey. Everyone's sort of director level and above. You try to get people with a 20,000 foot view of the supply chain. Like a lowly warehousing manager like I was, I wouldn't have really probably been invited to do a gig. And so we ask these folks every month, all right, what's going on? So when we get these in, and I think there's value in all of the metrics, inventory costs are important one to look at. But the ones that really tell the story of what's happening overall economically is transportation prices and transportation capacity. And the interplay between those lines really tells you sort of what is happening. And every time we see those lines cross, we call it a freight inversion. So when prices start growing faster than capacity, that's a positive inversion because now, demand is exceeding supply. And then the reverse would be a negative inversion. And so you asked about like, okay, did we see the other ones coming? I mean, I just posted actually a thing on LinkedIn about this yesterday. And I think it was in a Bloomberg article maybe too, that showing sort of the interplay between these two lines over the last 9 years. And you can see there's a couple inflection points. So you have one right at the beginning of 2018 when suddenly prices just boom and capacity really dips. And that's right after the tax cut that happened in the first Trump administration.
Because the first tariffs had come out, right? And then we kind of saw the manufacturing and
then it softened really fast. By the time we get to the middle of 2018, we're already seeing some of the sugar rush wear down a little bit. And then by the time we're in 19, we really see the big dip from like October of 18. We're up in the 80s for transportation prices. By the time we're in January of 19, we're way down in the 60s. Like it's dropping like a rock. And at the same time, capacity over that same time has gone from like a 40 in October. And in January, it's all the way up in like the mid 60s. So like we have that inversion right at the kind of the beginning of 19 as the real inversion happens. But we had really been trending that way through the fourth quarter of 2018. So that's our overall numbers. If you split it out, which we always do every month, into like upstream versus downstream. So downstream, we say would be like retailer, consumer facing. Upstream is like the producer level. We're talking wholesalers, manufacturers, LSPs. That had flipped in the fall. So really what we saw and it's why we started breaking out upstream, downstream is because FedEx missed their earnings in the last 2 quarters of 2018. And I remember it was kind of, well, that's weird because FedEx is such an indicator of, or UPS or any of those guys, just an indicator of economic activity. Why would they be negative, but we're not in a recession? And what we realized was all the B2B had slowed down because of the first round of tariffs, which seems quaint now. But partly, actually, the fact that such quaint tariffs were such a disruption 7 years ago, and we have these huge tariffs now that we're sort of taking a little better, really actually shows that supply chains are way more resilient and diversified than we were then.
Out of curiosity, your dad, have you talked to him since he started in supply chain? What does he see like the biggest evolution over his career? In the past, like if I feel like the speed of change in our industry is out of control, it's so fast.
Yeah, because he's been doing this forever. I think he started teaching at Nevada in 1990, but he was working in it, back in the 80s. And he has said to me so many times, there's never been a time of greater change than right now. I don't know how often Vladimir Lenin gets quoted on this podcast, but he has a quote that says, there's decades where nothing happens and there's weeks where decades happen. I don't agree with Vlad on much else, but I think that's probably right. And we really have seen these huge movements. I mean, look at like that first quarter of COVID. And that, by the way, is our next flip. It comes in May because we had a recession all the way from 2019, basically through May of 2020 when we put $1 trillion in the hands of consumers and suddenly spending goes up. It was crazy. I mean, you look at e-commerce. I always show this because I'm explaining to people, why did supply chains break? Well, you look at something like e-commerce. Going into Q1 of 2020, e-commerce makes up about 10% of all retail sales. In Q2, it made up 17% of all retail sales. Now, that's a 7-point jump. To get from 3 to 10, so the previous 7 points had taken 9 years. And so we had 9 years of growth in 3 months, which I always say to my students or companies I talk to, if somebody said, hey, you need to get 9 years of work done in the next 3 months, how do you think that would go? Would it be smooth? Probably not. And you saw the same stuff at the ports just getting overwhelmed. And we had so much change. Now we've really adapted, actually. And we're much more resilient now and able to do very cool things because we built capacity and resiliency in supply chains all over. I mean, places like Spot. We have so many more capabilities than we did even 5 years ago. And so we were able to sort of adjust, I think.
I was thinking about OTIF. I was telling somebody about this the other day. Like, if you think about OTIF and the impact on behavior, warehousing behavior, and way trucking companies and shippers interact, like, because of e-commerce, if it had never come about, OTIF would never existed. And back in COVID, you didn't care about in full. It was more on time. We were moving truckloads where trailer utilization was, I bet it was in like the 50, 60% utilization rate. But you had product on time because consumers, they do something else if not.
So true. And remember that's what got us into the debate, which was so funny about, like, is JIT really a good idea? Or is it JIC? Should it be just in case? And really the answer is, like, I mean, look at someone like Toyota, which, of every automaker, you would say definitely handled the pandemic better than anybody else. Partly, by the way, because they had been through the tsunami 7 years earlier and had learned a lot of lessons. And they're like, yeah, it's JIT for some stuff, but we're going to have a whole bunch of semiconductors. Like, we are going to have just basements full of semiconductors and not run out. And I mean, Ford took a $2 billion write down because they didn't have it. And now we really see 2024, JIT was back and it was great. And then 2025, big stock up again. I think something that people have learned, because JIT was taught as the gospel truth for like 30 years. And I think now what people have learned is you don't let your inventory policy dictate your strategy. You let your strategy dictate your inventory policy. And so sometimes JIT makes sense. Sometimes JIC makes sense. Like right now, we see way more stocking up than we saw last year, obviously, because people are afraid of tariffs. And I think that relates very much to what you're saying about trailer utilization. I mean, obviously, we know it'd be nice to cube out the whole thing. That would be great. But sometimes it's better to have half a truck and figure it out from there.
We do about 500 million just in JIT. So all our product is raw materials into CPG, and it's on a time window. You've got about 20 minutes to get in, and then it's going down the line and it's running. And I came from the Toyota world. We were a trucking company direct for them. It's like the models watching over the past 5 years has been dramatically like a big shift. But this year, which has been weird, we had a big event at our office in Indy where we brought in some Fortune 100 shippers. We brought them all in and listening to their different inventory strategies. Some have stocked and others are going direct, and they're bypassing any mixing centers or warehouses. They're going straight to production. So some have a glut and some are way down. It was like 50-50.
And I wonder, is any of that too? Because, a lot of the auto manufacturing stuff here is an FTZ. So I wonder if part of that too is, well, let's just go straight to the FTZ and then we can pay the tariffs on all this stuff later when the car is done.
The creativity and supply chains this year has been, it's amazing.
It's so incredible because the F-150, which has been the most popular truck in the United States for 60 years, crosses between the US, Mexico, and Canada 7 times when they build it. And now actually, it's funny, Ford has had a harder time than any of the other automakers this year because they do so much more of the final assembly here. So GM, a lot of that stuff finishes in Canada. Obviously, other things are coming in internationally. And because Ford has the, cross a bunch of time strategy and then come in and finish here, they've actually been hit hardest by the tariffs because the tariffs are the sort of stiffest for components over finished goods, right? So think about it. If I'm finishing the car up in Canada, that's a 25% tariff and then it comes down. If I'm finishing the car in Japan, 25% tariff comes in. If I'm finishing it in the United States, 50% on steel and aluminum, 100% on semiconductors, which there's 1,000 semiconductors in every new car. Then 25% on maybe the components from Japan or Korea, 45% if I'm getting battery stuff from China, 25 Mexico and Canada, and then I'm paying US labor. You're getting hit way harder actually to finish the car in the United States because the tariffs on the components are worse than the tariffs on the finished goods.
I love reading online. People will post, and you've probably gotten trolled on your LinkedIn post probably.
Yeah, I have LinkedIn trolls now, which is something I didn't know we were going to do actually.
I read them. I'm like, I don't get this, but whatever. So out of curiosity, like, what is the tariff? Like, when does it impact us? Do you think Is it coming or not? Because you've got people saying it's not happening. You have people saying it's going to come. I just feel like we've seen in the past week, we've been up 20 to 30% every month year over year this year. Dramatically in February, dramatically in March. And this month we're down 5 to 10%. We've never had a down month ever since I started the company. And like, this is the weirdest I've seen of the slowdown this week. When do you see it happening?
That's exactly right. By the way, remember we were talking about freight inversions a couple minutes ago? We had a -1 in August. We had been in a positive cycle since April of 2024. And it's only by a couple points. It is more upstream though. So upstream, we're about a 6-point inversion. Overall, we're like a 2-point inversion. And so we saw this negative inversion happen in August. And basically, here's kind of what happened. So yeah, for supply chains, through the first 2 months of the year, tariffs have not been the worst thing in the world. I mean, especially you saw December to March roaring imports. I mean, we brought so much in. And December is not normally a big import month, you know. And so we brought all this stuff in sort of, you know, after the election, ahead of tariffs happening, and really built up these huge, huge stocks. And those huge stocks we built up from December to March, that's a lot of the things that consumers have bought, honestly, in the first 7-8 months of the year, has been from that store. So all of that was sort of pre-tariff. Now, there's some additional costs on there because our holding costs have been so high because warehouses have been jammed, but it's protected, it's insulated consumers a little bit. Then we have this sort of slowdown in April with Liberation Day and kind of that air pocket hits all of the imports and stuff. And then we pause pretty much everything. And June and July are huge. I mean, July of 2025 was the busiest month ever in the history of the Port of Los Angeles. It's 117 years. The busiest month was July. Isn't that amazing? And by the way, speaking of resiliency, remember how bad the ports got hit in 2020? In 2025, bigger month in July than anything we had in 2020. Everything sailed through because we've really built so much resiliency and
their efficiency is better. I mean, back then we'd have boats sitting for days.
Yeah, we had boats sitting off the coast, you know, in 2020, and in 21 was the really bad year. You know, we had 119 boats. I remember looking one time in like September of 21, and dwell time was like 19 days, just waiting to get in. And now it's like, you know, a day, and we're going in quick and out. And so all of that stuff getting rushed in is what really buoyed a lot of the freight markets, because it's so funny. We've had kind of weird inventory and warehousing numbers all year. Our transportation numbers have been awesome all year in our index. Our transportation numbers have looked like we weren't getting great capacity utilization. Like we had a little bit of maybe slack in the market, but prices were growing very steadily, not spectacularly, not like 21 or 17, but we saw, you know, price growth in the 60s for most of the year. And then that kind of flips in August. And the reason it flips in August was, you know, even though we've extended again the tariffs to China, and I think we've kicked them back to November 10th at this point, we don't have that much more to bring in for the holiday season. Like when I'm talking to people, essentially they're like, yeah, we kind of did peak season early. So we pulled everything forward in, you know, the first 4 months of the year and then in June and July. And we've really seen slowdowns in August. I'll use the Port of LA again here as an example. If you look at the Port of LA signal, which I always like looking at the Port of Los Angeles because, you know, they're the big West Coast port. I mean, LA, especially if we're talking about stuff coming in from Asia, is like the front door of the US. And I just pulled up the numbers for this week. TEUs are down 15% from this time a year ago.
This is when Christmas freight hits.
Exactly.
The weird part is I was talking to somebody today because I always check to see when Christmas is moving. I'll ask what trucks cost going west. So I know if we're going truckloads out to LA, typically like a truckload in LA in a down market, say coming out of Indiana, would be between $4,000 to $5,000. We're moving trucks from Pennsylvania out in the $3,000 range. So trucks are screaming to get out that way, which typically like now that's what you see. Like I'm curious to see what's going to happen past like into September if that dies off a cliff quick.
Right. Because here's what I think happened is we had this funny split with our upstream and downstream inventories through the summer where retailers, after having built up these big stores kind of through the first quarter of the year, were really trying to run everything down. But upstream and specifically wholesalers were holding a ton of inventory. And we also split it out big versus little firms. it was smaller firms. Because if Walmart's bringing in Adidas shoes, Walmart's not going to hold the inventory. Neither's Adidas. Someone in the middle is, though. Some smaller wholesaler or whoever. And so those smaller wholesalers, basically what happened is we pulled all the holiday stuff over early, but the retailers didn't want it yet. The retailer's like, I'm still working on back to school. I'm still doing summer stuff. Don't bother me with this stuff. And so we sort of, what I think we're seeing is a bifurcated peak season.
Are you saying smaller firms taking the brunt of the inventory cost and not able to pass it off?
No, I mean, Walmart will tell you how much of it you need to take. And your very first question was, how are tariffs going to hit? And we're not going to see the full force of the tariffs. Even if something comes in and there's 25% tariff on it, that 25% is being spread out. Like, okay, maybe we ask our supplier in Asia to take a 5% hit. Maybe the wholesaler is going to take a 5% hit. Maybe the retailer is going to take 5%. And those 10% that are left over, we pass that to the consumer. Or maybe the wholesaler takes a little more or whatever. And so we're sort of spreading out the impact. And what we saw through the first 8 months of the year, certainly, was that the brunt of that was on the smaller middlemen in supply chain. So wholesalers, distributors, folks like that, because they were holding all this stuff. It was in August that we started to see retail inventories coming up again after they had been down all through the summer. And so what it seems like to me is we sort of had, if you think about peak season, it's, all right, all this stuff comes into the ports and then we're rushing it down to the retailers, classic sort of JIT, right? This year we had all the stuff come into the ports and sit. And now as we're moving into September, we're seeing, okay, now all that stuff that was sitting in the middle, it will start to go to the retail level. And it's why I think we're seeing rates be lowered, because instead of everything happening at the same time, it's like we did the first part, sat on it, and now we're doing the second part. And so supply and demand don't have the normal dynamics that we would see, because we have all of the supply was available to do the first half of peak, and now all the supply is available to do the second half of peak. And that's why we're seeing this sort of lower rates, because we sort of bifurcated peak season.
I remember when I got in trucking, we was on the asset side, and we're mostly automotive, and you had shutdown in July. You had a shutdown at the end of the year. And January and February were like, you were sitting in a desert with no water. And then in March, like, you back to your boot and you're back in the ocean having fun. It's been weird since 2009, where I look at inventory games have changed a lot. And where January, you bleed off inventory, November, December, then it's like you're back remanufacturing. And January, we haven't had but I wonder this year, like, listening to you, it's almost like it could fall off a cliff in terms of like you're going from warehouse to, but you're not going to go from manufacturing facilities out.
I think you're right. And the thing that remains to be seen, honestly, is where the tariffs end up. The hardest part is not that tariffs exist. Like, obviously, we know that things move more efficiently generally when there's not tariffs. But, we've had tariffs on like pickup trucks for 70 years. But because the rules haven't changed, we've been able to build these systems around it. It's why the F-150 moves back and forth between US, Mexico, and Canada 7 times. It's because of the tariffs we have. And so really the problem is right now, the uncertainty. It's not clear what the rules are going to be. I don't think anybody thought, even when we were starting these tariff programs up, like, okay, we're going to have higher tariffs on India than we will on China. I mean, we've been encouraging people to move production to India for the last 5 years.
Or Vietnam.
Yeah, or Vietnam. Apple does 15% of their phones in India, and we're like, hey, 50% tariff. It's like, okay.
Well, we get the shoe tariff. Like, we don't manufacture shoes, so it doesn't really.
And that's the thing that's, I think, difficult. Tariff should be a scalpel, really. If you want to put a tariff on a specific industry you think is important, I think that you can make some arguments for that. But to just put blanket tariffs, just 10% on everything, there's so much stuff we're never going to bring back here. And nobody wants to work in a blue jeans factory. That's not going to happen here.
I mean, I look at it too. It's like, we have a customer, they have a 500,000 square foot facility in Virginia, and I think they have 18 total human employees. The rest is all robots. Robots load the trucks, robots feed the line over on one side, robots de-stack, robots wrap. I mean,
well, and if you look at the jobs report that came out today, and maybe that dates this, that this is the first Friday of September that we're talking, we added 22,000 jobs. and lost jobs in manufacturing and in transportation. A lot of the growth is like hospitality right now.
When you talk about reshoring, is it ever going to happen? I mean, I just look at the supply chains today. It's so dynamic. Parts, inputs from all over. We ship stuff to Laredo, up to Canada. It's all interconnected. Like, do you ever see that coming back?
No, there's no reason for us to fully build anything in the United States. And we would limit ourselves, honestly. We don't make the best chips in the world. You know, I mean, there's a lot of things that we don't do the best of anybody. I mean, iPhones, we've never made one. And so even if we brought everything here, we don't have the expertise, and maybe we could build up the expertise over time, but the supply base is still somewhere else. And as we've seen, expecting people to move manufacturing here when there's tariffs on components doesn't really work. Really, it's more so than reshoring. What we've seen in the last 5 years, the China Plus One, is nearshoring, bring a lot of stuff to Mexico. With the CHIPS Act, and you know, there's some things that I think, it makes sense. Let's try to get semiconductors here. But one of the barriers we went into with the semiconductor stuff, beyond like we just don't have people who can do it yet, is there's all these little pieces. So like, you know, you have the final assembly of semiconductors in Taiwan, but then some of the packaging stuff that's like really kind of, you need low labor costs, has to happen in Vietnam. Well, it doesn't make sense for us to do that in Vietnam. So we had something that kind of came out of the CHIPS Act called friendshoring. So it's like, all right, well, we like Costa Rica. They're our friend and they could do things cheaper. So maybe they could do some of the packaging, or we'll put some stuff in Nicaragua or wherever. And so I think if you were really worried about 21 when we didn't have chips and it was really hard for us to get certain pharmaceutical stuff or whatever we were doing, it wouldn't be, it's all going to be in the United States. It would probably be more of a Pan-American sort of solution where it's like, okay, we could have a maybe Belt Road situation with Mexico and Central America and parts of South America. And by the way, if you make the economies better in Central and South America, might help immigration if anybody's wondering. People don't cross 5,000 miles because they have such a good job back home. And so you could bring some of that in. And I think maybe that's the one thing. But honestly, I don't think there's a very good argument that could be made that would say that the global supply chain ecosystem that we built has not been good for everybody. I mean, you know, if you look at the standard of living around the world, you look at the number of people, it's so much better than it was. And here's another quote I'll throw out to you. And this one, don't worry, this one's not a communist dictator. On the side of the building at the Thunderbird School in Arizona, which is a big international business school. It's now part of Arizona State, but for a long time, Thunderbird Business School is an international management school that was independent. And that school was started by former Air Force guys from World War II. It used to be where we did training for the Air Force pre-World War II out in the desert. And they all came back from World War II and they're like, okay, how do we not do that again? How would we avoid that? And so they said, we'll start an international business school. And on the side of the wall there, they have painted a quote from a guy named Frederick Bastiat that says, when goods don't cross borders, soldiers do. And what that means is, if we have economic ties around the world, we're probably not going to fight because there's so much to lose. And so the dynamics between the US and China, every time there's an established power and a rising power, there's always tension. Forever, there's been tension. But we're not going to fight each other if we're really tied together economically. And I don't think it's a good idea, honestly, for us to have, I mean, are we better off now than we were during the Cold War when the world was cut in half? Yeah, we probably are.
Plus competition. That's the most, like, innovation if you're sitting around echo chamber, so to speak, like you don't improve. And that's what's been part of what's made us great is innovation.
If you got to win. I mean, if suddenly my competitors have a 50% tariff, I don't think I need to try as hard. And maybe I even raise my prices by 20% because whatever, they're up 50. I don't have to compete nearly as hard.
I had a sales rep yesterday say to me, the customer's just cheap. And I said, well, goddamn, that's great. I'm happy. I mean, they're supposed to be, and it's our job to find something to help them. And if we don't, like, there's somebody else will. So, like, it's part of what we do.
Free markets are a good idea.
Yeah, great idea. I like a lot of stuff that you post. And if I'm a transportation manager, I have the very blessed my job. I get to travel across the country and see a new shipper almost every week, maybe sometimes 2 to 3. And I get to see their supply chains. And we're mostly Fortune 100, Fortune 500. And the question I get every single time at the end of the thing, what the hell do you think's going to happen? And so I love you post a lot of different cool content on updating the market, et cetera. What's something that shippers outside of the LMI to stay connected to the market? What do you look at to say like, hey, we're trending this way or we're doing this? What's something that shippers can look at?
There's a couple of things I look at. I always look at the Port of LA. Like I said, I think that's a real front door usually for the United States. And they do a really good, they put out new data every day, which is great. A lot of times I'll look at inventory to sales ratios at the wholesale level, manufacturing level, retail level. Those tend to sort of lag each other. Something really interesting that we've seen, by the way, is that pre-COVID, retail inventory to sales was always significantly higher than the wholesale level.
Inventory to sales was a retailer?
Yeah. Inventory to sales for retailers is always significantly higher than the wholesalers were. Now that's flipped, actually, because a lot more inventory is sort of pushed up to that middle. And so I think looking at things like that can be really, really interesting because it shows you sort of like how the structure of these chains has shifted a little bit. And I think if you understand the underlying structure, it gives you a pretty good idea because, structure drives behavior. And so if you understand the structure, you have a pretty good idea, I think, of what the incentives are behind things and sort of like where the busyness is going to be in lanes and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think wholesalers too. I love watching their results because to me, the middle portion of America will dictate transportation in a weird way, like is what they're buying in bulk or getting at bulk. They stop buying stuff cheap. Something's happening. So I love watching that.
Well, and the structure of that has changed. It's not bring things in and let it all sit in Riverside, California anymore. We're kind of out of space in Southern California.
Or get stolen.
Yeah, well, yeah, we talk about freight theft if you want. Now, you want to see creativity. Freight theft.
We've dealt with the Armenian mafia.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's been the craziest. I swear when I got into this industry, fax was the mode of communication. And we spend millions developing software to combat theft. I can't get it. It's out of control.
Well, you got people just old carrier numbers just so they can be on load boards, see where it's going to go. And then we'll go hang out at the truck stops. And we know that this one has TVs in it.
Yeah. And they'll Zelle for 7,000 for an MC. Then they got the FMCSA, re-register the MCS 150, then buy a website that they're buying on, it's a VPN somewhere else. You got a geofence. It's nuts.
Oh, yeah. It looks real.
Because it is real. The drivers, so we're spinning up AI now. We're going to come up with we're tinkering with an idea of the driver registers the driver with us. I tested it on my kids. I said, send me a fake ID and ran it through AI to get a sense of, is the watermark real?
Not a lot of people encourage their kids to come up with a fake ID. You really are a trailblazer.
It helped me, so.
I was talking to a former student who's at Target, and she was doing a lot of their drayage stuff on the East Coast. And she said it had gotten so bad last year, they're like, no load boards.
We want to eliminate it completely from our system. We move 3,000 trucks a day, and I want it out. It's so bad. What do you research now?
A couple of things right now. The stuff that's really has been a lot of fun, other than the index and stuff like that. We just published I think it's the first network analysis of reverse supply chains. So looking at, we got a bunch of data from some sort of salvage wholesaler folks, and we can now see the connections between, a lot of people, the secondary market for goods in the United States. So things that were either returned or were overstocked was $860 billion last year. It's 3% of GDP. If just our returns and overstocks were their own country, I think it would be the 22nd largest GDP in the world. Just us being like, oh no, maybe medium, and all that stuff has to go somewhere. And so we just did a network analysis about how those systems work because they're so different. Forward supply chains are like, here's my buyer, here's the supplier, here's their supplier. And we're trying to drive scale and drive cost, and we're going to sort of set up structures, With reverse, it's Wild West. It's totally ad hoc. It's some guy shows up with a flatbed and is like, yeah, I'll take 2 pallets and I'll sell it on eBay. And my grandson really likes this show. So yeah, I'll buy those toys. And it's just so interesting. But what's happening is we are seeing a great deal of analytics come into this sort of ad hoc world. It's not so much, speaking of mafia, you want to know where the mafia is? It's in return. It's not so much, handshake deals by waste management companies anymore. Now there's actually really sophisticated software optimizing dispositions, figuring out, ITAD, where we're getting rid of our IT assets in like responsible ways, getting the data scraped off. It's not just put it on the back of a truck and get rid of it anymore. When I was a returns manager 15 years ago, it was, hey, get all this junk out. And now you see companies building their whole strategies around, how do I optimize this?
Especially if it's subscription based. Like, so we're seeing this more on like equipment where there's a software component subscription. If people want to return or damage stuff, your point, like back in I used to watch, to put it in a crude way, but it was more like a stepchild of supply chain. Because on the outbound, it was a cost per case, cost per pound, cost per pallet. On the way back, just get the damn thing out of my way. And now it's like, if you have to pool it. And then when do we utilize a trailer? Do we do LTL? Do we do truckload? Do we do rail? And then how much is it costing us for pallet in, pallet out?
And the thing is there is a market for all that stuff. And one of the things that I am suspecting, like if you look at where earnings have gone up this year, TJ Maxx is doing great. If we see, we got a tariff on clothes, what's it? Marshalls or Ross or those kinds of places. You look now, there's 120 more Nordstrom racks than there are regular Nordstroms. Customers are okay with that sort of model. And so I think that we've seen really steady, kind of amazing growth in reverse markets. I wouldn't be surprised because in 2008, we saw it really sort of spike up a little bit. I wouldn't be surprised if one of the reactions to the uncertainty around tariffs is a little bit more energy and I think probably more money and more analytics thrown at those reverse networks.
It's interesting too, watching that and tech. Everybody talks about the registrations on MCs. And I always say, like, even though there's way more MCs, there's not way more capacity. I tell shippers all the time, just watch. This will go down. Operating costs are up. Middle carriers that haul automotive, they run at tight operating ratios are like 96, 97. You can't sustain this. And what's going to happen is they'll pull these trucks out of the market. And you can't run a bunch of owner-operator. No offense to that. I love them, but that's not going to be enough to carry capacity. And so it will adjust faster. We're seeing more bid behavior. I've seen this Q4, more shippers come out in bid behavior saying we're going to capture cost reduction. And I keep saying, Pim, look, it's not smart. Like, it's just not a good strategy because it will flip and you'll overcorrect. And we're going to go back to the elephant and goldfish thing.
Absolutely. It's so hard to get. And you're never going to nail capacity versus overcapacity. But one of the things that we've seen over and over is these real boom bust cycles. And it's almost like we never had the boom cycle this time around.
Everybody keeps saying it's a freight recession. And I don't call it that. I may disagree with me, but I call it a freight reset. Markets should behave normally. Trucking companies had ORs in the 78, 80. Like, that's not normal. You're running assets. And so it was not normal. I remember shipping packaging. We want to be in 300 to 400 mile range on packaging. We were shipping aluminum cans 3,000 miles to support plants, $5,000 truckloads. The load's not even worth that.
No, not at all. But you had to do it because, especially we're talking about 20 or 21, people couldn't go to a restaurant or a bar, and so they needed the cans. One of our good partners here is Ball, who makes a lot of the aluminum cans, and it's a great company, but they got totally thrown. It was such a classic bullwhip effect in 2020 and 21 because demand went up so much. They had to increase capacity and it made sense at the time. And then you turn around in 22 and suddenly everything falls off a cliff. And there was some tough sort of restructuring and they're on better. Well, they were on better footing. And then of course now 50% aluminum tariffs makes their life hard. One of my former students actually is specifically in charge of sourcing aluminum. And she's like, my life is not that easy. But it's the same thing that you see in the trucking industry where we're always in this mode of correction versus overcorrection. And it's been this really interesting thing in the last decade where all of our big movements have been an external shock. Big tax cut, the tariffs the first time around, COVID, and then the stimulus going the other way. When did everything drop out? March of 22. What happened? Russia invades Ukraine. And suddenly 2 of the 5 biggest producers of wheat and 1 of the biggest producers of oil suddenly off the board. Well, are wheat and oil inputs in anything you can think of? Yeah, okay. So inflation happens, and this recovery we've been having in 24 is the first one in the last 10 years that wasn't because of some shock. It was an organic recovery. And now we have tariffs coming down again, and maybe that's another external shock. And so one of the reasons why I think probably so many people feel like they've been buffeted is because it's just been disruption after disruption, really going back to 2017.
I told somebody, I'm like, we started in 2009. I would just keep my head down and go to work because people still have to eat and drink cheap beer, So, but now, man, the news cycles, I had brown hair a year ago. That's like, man, that's every day's a news cycle.
Yep. No, my beard used to be a little darker now, actually, when I started this index. It's, one of the steps of putting the index together is because we always come out the first Tuesday of every month. So the last Thursday and Friday of the previous month or however it works out, I call it book report day. And I'll just sit there and I'm always reading all the time, but I just go through everything that's been written in the last month and make this giant, it's usually like a sort of summary of everything. And I'll sit there and read it and I'll just think, man, there's a lot going on, right? In the last few months, my goodness, have just been, I liked it when it was a little more boring in some
ways. Yeah. We used to have 12-month, freight cycles. I don't know. I was a lot happier. I guess that's what makes you great, makes you evolve and all that. So shippers always, they just want insight. And I think in trucking companies and logistics people, warehousing. So
the logistics apparatus that we have, the State of Logistics report, I think the estimate was $2.58 trillion is what we spent on logistics in the United States. If that was its own country, it would be the 8th biggest in the world, right between France and Italy. And it's it's maybe the most important industry in many ways, and no one thinks about it. Everyone just kind of assumes stuff is just on the shelf. I don't know. I don't know how to get here.
Everything goes on a truck. 80% of everything touches a truck.
Right. Every single thing. And it's so funny that it's such an important industry. But, one of the reasons we started the index is because we thought there's not enough analysis. Like people are so hungry for content and information and some guidance. And so anything that we could do, or I see a bunch of other stuff popping up now. I love that more stuff is coming out because this is an industry that so sort of almost lives in an information desert in some ways and so desperately needs this. And if you can improve transportation and logistics, it's going to improve everything else. Because like you said, we touch every other industry on the planet.
I was thinking about this, and there's a couple of you guys I think that I respect and the content that comes out. I never would have said your name 5 years ago. No offense, but like now, I love what you guys put, Jason Miller from MSU. I love what he puts out. And like people now are starving to understand what the hell should I do? How should I plan for next year? What's really going on? And there really, for the longest time, there was really nothing good out there. I used to know the markets because I priced assets across the country. And I knew when cranberry season was, I knew when beer season was, but I knew it all. But now, I don't need to know it all. Well, thanks a lot, man. I really appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. No, this was a ton of fun. Obviously, as you can probably tell, there's nothing I'd rather do on a Friday morning than sit here and talk about supply chains.
And that's a wrap for More Than a Broker. You heard firsthand accounts from industry experts and Spot's hardworking individuals, revealing a culture of collaboration and innovation. For more information about Spot, our service offerings, our people and culture, our job postings, and more, check us out online at spotinc.com. That is spotinc.com. Thank you for listening and for being part of this journey. Until next time, keep striving to be more than a broker.